This is Mr. Atkinson, and in this lesson I'm going to talk to you about filling out a 1040 Easy tax return form. This is the most basic tax return form that you can use personally to fill out a tax return at the end of the fiscal year to submit to the IRS to record your earnings and receive a refund, or unfortunately maybe even have to pay more taxes. So this is what the form looks like. It's very simple. It's actually 2 pages. You have the main component here where you'll enter all your information, and then you have some instruction sheets on the back as well. We're not really going to get into this. I'm just going to walk you through this main page here. So we'll be entering information into this form here. I have a tax scenario for you that you'll have when you complete this, and that is going to be a little bit like this one here. This is a W-2. This is something that your employer will mail to you at the end of the fiscal year. Usually comes in January or February sometime, and it has all of your employer and employee information listed, including your gross wages and taxable income and all the tax that was withheld from your paycheck, money you didn't even see, from the federal government, from the state government down here, and from the local government or municipality. So just a brief walkthrough on this. You can see that we've got the employer's information name here and their address. We've got the employee's information down here, starting with the social security number, their first name, middle initial, last name, street address, city, state, and zip code. And then going over, starting with box 1, it lists this is total gross wages, tips, and any other payments received from this particular job. In this case, we've got George C. Washington, and he just happens to work for the White House. And during this fiscal year, he was paid $12,500 for the work he did for the White House. And we'll see over here in box 2 that they took $1,000 for federal income tax, $800 for Social Security, and $150 for Medicare tax. These are taxes that they take automatically. You don't ever see this money, and you don't really get much of it back at the end of the year. You may get some of the income tax from the federal income tax withheld back, depending on how your W-2 or how your 1040 Easy pans out after you've completed it. For this purpose of this assignment, we're not going to deal with the state and local information down here, so you don't even have to worry about that. Now, what's unique about this, but very common in many households, is that we have, notice, a W-2 here at the top, and if you scroll down, you have a dark black line that separates another W-2. There's a second W-2. Well, if we look at this, we can see that there's a different employer. This is Bob's Barbecue, and a different employee. This is Martha Washington. And if you were assuming that this was a married couple, you're correct. George and Martha just happen to be married. You can see that by the address. They share the same address, they share the same last name, but Martha has her own employment. So we see a different set of wages, a different set of income tax withheld, and Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare tax withheld as well. What we're going to do when we put these on the 1040 Easy is combine this information for the record because they're contributing together to the same household. So we'll add together their total wages, we'll add together their total tax withheld, and we'll record that information accordingly on the W or on the 1040 Easy form. Also, on the W-2 page here, these scenarios that you were given, there's some additional information, and this you need to know for some of the questions asked on the 1040 Easy. So we can see here, it just confirms, yes, they're married and there are no children. And there's a question of dependent children on the 1040 that we'll go over. Gives the occupation for both, and it gives their filing status. It says right here that they're filing a joint return. This means, like I said, that they're going to combine their income and wages and their tax withheld when they're reporting to the IRS. The last piece of information we need is taxable interest. Okay, this is something that is, if you had money in a bank account, you would have to claim this money on your 1040 Easy as income earned, because it's income that you earned from money that you had in a bank account or a mutual fund, something that was earning interest. So we can see that George earned $200 in interest and Martha earned $100 down here. And the last thing we need to know is right here that the parents cannot claim them, and we'll revisit that again on the 1040 Easy form. So that's a W-2 in a nutshell. Let's go back and look at the 1040 Easy here. Now, basically what you're going to do is just start filling this information in using the information from the W-2 and that additional information on the bottom of that scenario. So, since George is the head of the household, we're going to fill his name in here. George C. His last name was Washington. If we go back here and look at George's information, his social security number is 333-221111. Not very original, I know, but that's the one we're using. If this is a joint return, we'll enter the spouse's name here. Well, we know that Martha is George's wife. This is a joint return, so we're going to put her information here. And Martha's social security number can be found on her W-2 down here. Whoops, which is 111223333. So we'll go ahead and put that in down here. Their home address, which we'll find right under their name on their information, we know it's the same. So if we look here, it's the same. So we'll enter that, 9999 Liberty Lane, Washington, D.C. 56789. This disclaimer, these are not real addresses. We're just using them for the sake of this assignment, just in case you wondered. We'll put that information here. And the zip code was 56789, I believe. They're not members of foreign countries. They don't live in foreign countries, so don't have to put anything there. And you don't have to worry about this presidential election campaign contribution. So don't worry about this final line up here, and don't worry about this over here. We're going to skip right down and get right into the 1040 form here. It asks us wages, salaries, and tips. This should be shown in box 1 of your W-2 form. So we go back to the W-2. We see that George's are $12,500, but remember we have to add Martha's in, so we look at Martha's down here. Martha's are $5,000. 5,000 plus 12,500 is, I'll give you a minute to think about that. You guessed it, 17,500. Now what this line here signifies is the decimal place. We always round to the nearest dollar, up or down, so you're just going to always have zeros filled in over here. The next line, line 2, asks for taxable interest. So we go back to their W-2 forms. Now these aren't on their W-2, it's down here at the additional information. Martha's was 100, George's is 200. Simple math dictates that we're looking at $300 here. Now for all scenarios that you're going to be working with, the unemployment compensation in Alaska Permanent Funds is going to be 0. So just always zero that out. You don't have to worry about entering anything there. Line number 4, add lines 1, 2, and 3. This is your adjusted gross income. So 1, 2, and 3. If we bring those straight down, we can see that the math dictates that it's $17,800.00. Line 5, I mentioned that on their W-2, the additional information form says that no one can claim George, and this goes for Martha as well. So when we go to question 5, we can ignore this because no one is claiming either one of these people. And it says right down here specifically, if no one can claim you or your spouse, if a joint return, enter the value $10,150 for a single returner. But in this case, this is a married filing jointly return. So we enter the value $20,300 just like it is there. And that's called a standard deduction, is what that number is. So let's look at line number 6. It says subtract line 5 from line 4. That means take line 4, 17,800, minus line 5. Well, if we look at the second part of line 6, if line 5 is larger than line 4, we enter 0. Line 5 is obviously larger than line 4, so we will enter 0. This is a unique situation in which their standard deduction is greater than their actual gross income, which means they paid taxes into the system, but they didn't even make enough money to cover and go above and beyond the standard deduction. So they're accountable for 0 tax dollars. They should not have to pay anything. They didn't make enough money. In fact, if they lived in the area in St. Clair County, I think they'd be considered at poverty level, unfortunately. So this is a unique situation that I will highlight here. Look at line 7. This is where we get into payments, credits, and tax. Federal income tax withheld. Go back to the W-2 form here, and remember we need to add these together. Martha's federal income tax withheld on line 2 is 800. George's is 1,000. So 800 plus 1,000 puts us at 1,800. So we'll enter that value right here. Lines number 8A, earned income credit, and 8B, non-taxable combat pay, are always 0. We're not throwing any tricky situations in here, so you can just put those at 0. Now line 9 says add lines 7, 8A together, which is our total payments. Well, we know that they paid in $1,800. We saw that on their W-2. It was withheld from their paychecks. Line 10, this brings in another form. It says use the amount on line 6 to find your tax in the tax table in the instructions, and then enter that value on line 10. Well, if we look at line 6, it's 0. I've given you a set of tax tables here, and they look something like this. This is a tax table, goes 0 to $100,000. What we do is we find that information on the tax tables, and then if they're single, we use the gray column, and if they're married, we use the white column. And we find the value that coincides. If we go, here's the amount they made, and they're married, so we look up, and where that intersects, we find that value. Well, theirs was 0, which makes this really easy. Here's 0. Here is married filing jointly, 0. So that value, it says your tax is 0. So when we go to their W-2, we will enter 0 as their tax. They are not accountable for any tax. This is something new this year with the health care. We're going to check this box and assume that they had full coverage because there's too many other instructions that you needn't worry about at this point. So you can leave this blank here. So that brings us to line number 12, which adds line 10 and 11 together. Well, 10 and 11 are 0. Now in some instances you may have a value here for 10, but in this one we don't. So we're going to enter 0 here. Now we need to determine whether George and Martha are receiving a refund here from box or line number 13A, or whether or not they owe money down here on line number 14. We don't have to worry anything about the routing number and the account number down here, and you don't have to worry about anything from third-party designee on down. You're not going to fill any of that out. We just need to find out if they're getting a refund or if they owe money. Let's look at the refund first. If line 9 is larger than line 10, line 9 is 1,800, line 10 is 0. Yes, it is. Subtract line 9 from line number 12. So we can see that the math, if we take 12 minus 1,800, is 1,800. So George and Martha are going to get all of the money back that was withheld from their taxes because, like I mentioned earlier, they just didn't make enough to have to pay any taxes. Lucky for George and Martha. So they will not owe any money, and their tax return is done. And you can complete this tax return and begin the next scenario you've got. Hope you found this helpful. Please ask any questions if you're struggling to get through these, but this should guide you through these tax return scenarios. Thank Thanks for watching.